What if the gasoline in your car and the electricity powering entire cities came from forests and oceans that vanished hundreds of millions of years ago? Tonight, we're exploring the incredible origin of coal and oil and how ancient life became the energy that built the modern world. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe. More than 300 million years ago, long before humans built cities, long before mammals ruled the land, and even before the first dinosaurs appeared, Earth looked like a planet from another world entirely. Vast forests stretched across enormous, swampy lowlands beneath a sky richer in oxygen than the one above us today. The air itself may have felt heavier, warmer, and strangely alive. Giant fern-like plants towered over dark wetlands. Thick mosses covered the ground in endless layers. Trees unlike anything alive today rose silently from black water and disappeared into humid mist. And hidden beneath those forests, beneath the mud and flooded roots and stagnant pools, the foundation of the modern industrial world was already beginning to form. It is difficult to imagine now because modern Earth feels so familiar to us. We think of forests as places filled with birdsong, mammals, flowers, and grass. But those ancient forests belonged to a completely different biological age. There were no flowering plants yet, no fields of grass moving in the wind. Many of the trees did not even reproduce with seeds. Instead, spores drifted through the humid atmosphere like invisible clouds. Some ancient plants reached heights over 100 feet tall, despite having soft internal structures compared to modern hardwood trees. Others looked like gigantic horsetails rising from shallow water, like alien bamboo. The deeper scientists study these ecosystems, the stranger they appear. Some researchers believe these forests may have produced oxygen levels approaching 30% of the atmosphere during certain periods, far above modern levels. That single difference may help explain one of the most famous mysteries of the Carboniferous world: giant insects. Dragonflies with wingspans larger than hawks moved through the air above the swamps. Millipede-like arthropods, longer than a human body, crawled through dense vegetation. Enormous cockroach relatives thrived in the shadows. For decades, scientists debated exactly why these creatures became so large. Higher oxygen levels remain one of the strongest explanations because insects absorb oxygen differently than mammals do. In a richer atmosphere, their bodies may simply have been able to support larger sizes. But even now, questions remain. Some paleontologists suspect climate stability, predator pressures, and evolutionary timing all played important roles together. What is certain is that Earth, during this era, did not resemble the world we know. It was wetter, greener, and in many places, almost endlessly fertile. Massive swamp forests covered huge portions of what would one day become North America and Europe. The continents themselves were arranged differently then, slowly drifting toward the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea. Sea levels rose and fell repeatedly across millions of years. Flooding forests, and then exposing them again. Rivers moved slowly through warm lowlands, carrying sediment into shallow basins. Again and again, forests expanded, died, sank beneath water, and disappeared under layers of mud. And this cycle would eventually create something extraordinary. But at the time, none of it would have seemed dramatic. No single day transformed forests into coal. No ancient catastrophe instantly buried entire worlds beneath the ground. Instead, it happened with terrifying slowness. Trees fell into oxygen-poor wetlands, where decomposition struggled to fully break them down. Thick layers of plant matter accumulated over unimaginable stretches of time. New forests grew above older dead ones. Floods buried entire ecosystems beneath sediment. Pressure slowly increased. Heat slowly rose. And deep underground, chemistry began reshaping sunlight from an ancient Earth into concentrated energy. In a strange way, every lump of coal contains echoes of a vanished atmosphere. The energy locked inside it originally came from sunlight absorbed by plants hundreds of millions of years ago. Those forests were effectively giant biological machines, converting solar energy into carbon-rich matter on a planetary scale. When modern humans burn coal today, they are releasing ancient sunlight back into the atmosphere after it remained trapped underground longer than mammals have existed. That realization changes the way these ancient forests feel. They were not simply ecosystems. They were part of a planetary process so enormous that its consequences would not fully appear until intelligent life emerged far in the future. And perhaps the strangest part is that those forests may only have existed because Earth briefly entered a unique biological window, unlikely to happen in exactly the same way again. One major theory suggests that for millions of years, dead wood accumulated faster than nature could recycle it. Modern forests decay relatively efficiently because fungi and microbes evolved specialized abilities to break down lignin, the tough structural material inside wood. But during parts of the Carboniferous period, some scientists believe those decomposers had not yet fully evolved the same capabilities. As a result, fallen plant matter may have piled up in staggering quantities across swampy environments. Not all researchers completely agree on how large this effect truly was. Some argue decomposition still occurred more effectively than older theories assumed. Others believe climate and water saturation mattered more than biological limitations alone. But nearly everyone agrees on one point. Conditions during this era strongly favored the preservation of organic material. The world was accidentally storing carbon underground at a massive scale. And that buried carbon would eventually alter the fate of human civilization. Yet none of this would have been visible from inside those forests themselves. Imagine standing there at dusk beside black swamp water reflecting enormous trees disappearing into fog. The ground would feel unstable beneath layers of wet vegetation. Strange insects would move through the humid air. Amphibians, some much larger than modern species, hunted near the water's edge. The atmosphere may have smelled rich with decay and plant oils. In some regions, seasonal flooding repeatedly drowned entire landscapes beneath slow-moving water, carrying sediment from distant highlands. It was a world suspended between growth and burial. Life expanded aggressively there, but the environment also trapped its remains instead of returning them completely back into the atmosphere. This balance may help explain why the Carboniferous became one of the most important chapters in Earth's energy history. And even now, scientists continue uncovering details that complicate the story further. Some coal deposits formed from tropical wetlands near the equator. Others developed under different environmental conditions over different time periods. Certain coal seams contain fossilized tree bark, spores, and microscopic evidence of vanished climates. By studying them carefully, researchers can reconstruct rainfall patterns, atmospheric conditions, and ecological shifts from hundreds of millions of years ago. In many ways, coal seams behave like buried climate archives, preserving pieces of a forgotten Earth. That forgotten Earth also experienced instability. Toward the later Carboniferous and into the Permian period, climate conditions began changing dramatically. Glaciations expanded in parts of the southern hemisphere. Atmospheric chemistry shifted. Ancient ecosystems transformed. Some swamp forests collapsed as environments became drier. The age of giant wetland forests slowly faded, and new evolutionary pressures reshaped life on land. But by then, the underground foundations of future fossil fuel reserves had already been laid across enormous regions of the planet. It is unsettling to realize how much of modern civilization depends on these ancient accidents of geology and biology. Steel industries, railroads, electrical grids, cargo ships, plastics, fertilizers, highways, and entire global economies ultimately trace part of their existence back to silent wetlands that disappeared before the first dinosaur egg was ever laid. The modern world often feels fast and temporary, yet beneath cities and highways lie compressed remnants of forests older than complex animal life on land had barely begun to stabilize. And perhaps that is why these ancient environments continue to fascinate scientists so deeply. They remind us that the world humans inherited was shaped by processes operating across timescales almost impossible for the human mind to naturally grasp. Entire mountain ranges rose and eroded while these buried forests transformed underground. Species appeared and vanished above them. Continents drifted thousands of miles. And eventually, one intelligent species learned how to dig into the earth and ignite the remains of worlds it never witnessed. Even now, when miners cut through deep coal seams, they sometimes uncover fossilized impressions of bark, leaves, and roots, preserved with astonishing detail. Perfect patterns from forests long erased from the surface still survive hidden underground in darkness. It is almost like Earth never fully forgot them. In the modern world, death usually disappears quickly. A tree falls in a forest, and within years, insects, fungi, bacteria, moisture, and oxygen begin pulling it apart, piece by piece, until almost nothing recognizable remains. Nature is incredibly efficient at recycling itself. Forest floors become dark, living systems, constantly consuming the dead to feed the living again. But hundreds of millions of years ago, something strange may have been happening across the ancient swamps of Earth. The cycle was no longer fully working. Vast amounts of plant material were accumulating faster than the planet could erase them. And because of that imbalance, entire landscapes slowly began sinking into the ground, almost intact. At first glance, the forests themselves probably looked overwhelmingly alive. Dense vegetation spread in every direction beneath warm skies and constant humidity. Thick roots tangled through shallow black water. Giant trees collapsed into swamps, already crowded with older fallen trunks. Layer upon layer of dead plant matter collected beneath the surface like wet blankets of carbon-rich debris. But unlike modern forests, much of that material did not completely decay. Something was interrupting the normal rhythm of decomposition. One of the biggest reasons may have been hidden inside the chemistry of wood itself. Ancient plants had evolved strong structural tissues containing lignin, a complex molecule that helped support enormous trunks and towering growth. Lignin is incredibly durable even today. It gives wood rigidity and resistance. But breaking it apart requires specialized biological tools. Modern fungi possess enzymes capable of attacking lignin efficiently, allowing dead wood to eventually rot and collapse back into soil. Yet some researchers suspect that during parts of the Carboniferous period, many decomposers had not fully evolved these capabilities yet. If that idea is correct, then Earth briefly entered a strange evolutionary gap where forests could produce wood faster than ecosystems could recycle it. Dead trees would accumulate across swamps and wetlands year after year, century after century, eventually forming thick layers of partially preserved organic matter. It is an almost unsettling possibility because it suggests that one of the most important energy resources in human history may exist partly because fungi evolved too slowly. Not every scientist completely agrees with this interpretation. Over the last 2 decades, several studies challenged the older version of the lignin gap theory, arguing that ancient fungi capable of decomposing wood may have existed earlier than previously believed. Some paleobotanists now think environmental conditions played a much larger role than evolutionary timing alone. Waterlogged wetlands naturally limit oxygen, and without oxygen, decomposition slows dramatically, no matter how advanced microbial life becomes. In reality, the answer may involve both processes working together. The forests themselves produced enormous quantities of plant material, while swampy conditions prevented much of it from fully breaking down. That combination created a world where the dead lingered beneath the living. In many of these ancient wetlands, oxygen struggled to penetrate beneath the surface. Fallen trees sank into stagnant water and thick mud, where bacteria could not function efficiently. Modern swamps still preserve organic material for similar reasons. Peat bogs in parts of Europe sometimes preserve human bodies for thousands of years with astonishing detail because low oxygen and acidic conditions slow decay. But the Carboniferous wetlands operated on scales far beyond anything humans experience today. Entire ecosystems became trapped beneath layers of sediment and standing water. During floods, rivers buried forests beneath mud, washed from distant uplands. Sea levels periodically rose, drowning coastal swamps beneath shallow inland seas. Then, water retreated, and new forests grew directly above older buried ones. Again and again, the surface world kept building on top of itself, like pages stacking inside a geological archive. Deep beneath the wetlands, pressure slowly increased as sediments accumulated over millions of years. But before that pressure transformed plant matter into coal, there was another stage first: peat. Peat is essentially partially decayed vegetation compressed into thick organic layers. Even today, peatlands exist across parts of Canada, Siberia, and northern Europe. Walking across them can feel almost surreal because the ground itself behaves like a soaked sponge floating over ancient preserved plant material. In some regions, peat accumulates only millimeters per year, yet over enormous stretches of time, those millimeters become entire underground worlds. Carboniferous peat swamps likely covered immense regions of the planet, and unlike ordinary soil, peat stores carbon instead of rapidly releasing it back into the atmosphere. This detail may have changed Earth's climate in profound ways. Some scientists believe the massive burial of carbon during the Carboniferous contributed to long-term drops in atmospheric carbon dioxide, potentially helping cool parts of the planet and even influencing later glaciations. In other words, ancient forests were not just passive landscapes. They may have actively reshaped global climate systems simply through the way they died. The idea feels strangely modern. Today, scientists warn about carbon release from fossil fuels affecting climate stability. But hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth may have experienced the opposite process on a gigantic scale, with carbon disappearing underground faster than it returned to the atmosphere. The forests were slowly locking pieces of the sky beneath the ground. Yet inside those swamps, life continued moving normally, unaware of what was forming below. Amphibians hunted through dark water. Insects buzzed beneath giant leaves. Storms rolled across endless wetlands under skies glowing orange at sunset through thick, humid air. And beneath the roots, old forests compressed silently into deeper layers of peat and buried carbon. Sometimes, entire stands of trees may have drowned almost in place. Fossilized root systems discovered in coal-bearing rocks occasionally preserve evidence of forests buried where they originally grew. In certain mines, paleontologists have found upright fossil trees extending through multiple sediment layers, as though the forest itself had been frozen mid-collapse. These discoveries reveal how dynamic and unstable those environments were. Flooding, sedimentation, subsidence, and shifting coastlines constantly transformed the landscape. It was not one peaceful swamp existing unchanged for millions of years. It was a restless world repeatedly creating and burying life. Some coal seams contain alternating bands of plant material and sediment, so precise that researchers can reconstruct ancient environmental cycles almost season by season. Tiny fossil spores trapped inside the layers help scientists identify what kinds of plants dominated different regions. Microscopic charcoal fragments suggest ancient wildfires occasionally swept through portions of the forests, despite the humidity. Even the chemistry of the rocks preserves clues about oxygen levels and atmospheric conditions from a vanished Earth. The deeper researchers look, the more these coal deposits resemble time capsules rather than simple fuel. And perhaps the most haunting part is how accidental the entire process seems. There was no purpose behind these forests becoming future energy reserves. Earth was simply operating through biological and geological systems interacting over unimaginable time. Plants evolved. Wetlands expanded. Decomposition slowed. Sediments buried organic matter. Pressure increased. Chemistry changed. And eventually, long after those forests disappeared, another species arrived, capable of uncovering what had been hidden underground. Some scientists wonder whether fossil fuel formation on Earth required an unusually rare sequence of events unlikely to occur often elsewhere in the universe. Complex plant life had to evolve. Stable wetlands had to persist. Carbon burial had to outpace decomposition for long periods. Geological conditions had to preserve the material instead of destroying it through heat or tectonic activity. Even slight differences in Earth's biological history might have prevented enormous coal deposits from ever forming at all. If decomposers had evolved slightly differently, or if ancient climates shifted earlier, modern industrial civilization may have emerged in a completely different way, or perhaps far more slowly. That possibility changes how these ancient forests feel. They stop seeming like distant prehistoric scenery and start feeling more like hidden foundations beneath modern life itself. Every train line, electrical grid, steel factory, and industrial city was indirectly shaped by processes beginning inside those oxygen-poor swamps. Humanity inherited energy stored by ecosystems that vanished hundreds of millions of years before humans evolved. And unlike sunlight or wind, fossil fuels are not part of a rapidly renewing cycle. They are remnants of ancient worlds accumulated through deep geological time and consumed astonishingly quickly once discovered. Even today, when miners cut into coal seams underground, they sometimes expose textures from ancient bark, preserved leaves, or compressed forests hidden in darkness since before the first dinosaurs existed. In certain moments, the line between geology and memory almost disappears. The Earth beneath modern civilization still contains shadows of forests that nature never fully managed to erase. Deep beneath the surface of the Earth, far below forests, cities, highways, and oceans, there are places where time seems to move differently. Layers of ancient rock rest on top of one another, like the pages of an impossibly old book, each one preserving fragments of climates, storms, extinctions, and forgotten worlds. Somewhere inside those layers, compressed beneath mountains of sediment and trapped in darkness for hundreds of millions of years, the remains of ancient swamps slowly began transforming into one of the most energy-rich substances humanity would ever discover. But the creation of coal was never fast, and it was never simple. It happened through pressure so immense and time so vast that the human mind struggles to truly visualize it. Long after the ancient wetlands disappeared beneath mud and water, the the buried plant material beneath them continued changing. At first, those underground layers still resembled peat more than coal. They were wet, soft, and filled with partially preserved organic matter. But as rivers shifted, seas advanced, and new sediments accumulated above them, the weight pressing downward became enormous. Every new layer of sand, clay, and rock increased the pressure beneath it. Temperatures slowly rose deeper underground as Earth's internal heat seeped upward through the crust. And over millions of years, something remarkable began happening inside those buried remains of vanished forests. The material itself started changing chemically. Water was gradually squeezed out. Gases escaped. Carbon concentrations increased. The dead plants were no longer simply decaying. They were being transformed. Scientists call this long process coalification, though the word almost sounds too clinical for what it represents. In reality, it was more like Earth slowly cooking entire ecosystems underground. The first stage after peat is often called lignite or brown coal. Lignite still contains relatively high moisture and lower carbon content compared to harder forms of coal. It is softer, crumbles more easily, and retains more visible traces of its organic origins. In some lignite deposits, ancient wood textures can still be recognized with surprising clarity. It almost feels unfinished, as though the transformation had only partially completed before geological conditions changed again. But when burial continues deeper and temperatures rise further, lignite slowly transforms into bituminous coal. This darker, denser form contains much higher carbon concentrations and far more stored energy. It became one of the fuels that powered factories, locomotives, steamships, and eventually entire industrial nations. Under even greater heat and pressure, bituminous coal can continue transforming into anthracite, the hardest and most carbon-rich form of coal commonly found. Anthracite burns hotter and cleaner than softer coals and often appears with a glossy, almost metallic shine. In some ways, anthracite represents the final stage of a journey that began inside ancient swamp water hundreds of millions of years earlier. And perhaps the strangest part is that sunlight still lies at the center of the story. Every tree, fern, and plant buried in those prehistoric wetlands originally grew by capturing solar energy through photosynthesis. The plants absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and used sunlight to build tissues rich in carbon compounds. When those plants died and became buried, instead of fully decomposing, the energy remained locked inside them. Coal is essentially ancient sunlight, preserved underground in chemical form. When humans burn it, they are releasing energy captured by forests that disappeared before mammals even existed. A modern power plant can therefore be seen not just as a machine burning rock, but as a system releasing stored sunlight from a lost Earth. That realization gives coal an almost eerie quality. It is not merely fuel, it is biological memory compressed by geology. And the deeper miners dig into coal seams, the more visible that memory sometimes becomes. Certain underground coal deposits contain delicate fossil impressions of bark, roots, spores, and leaves preserved in astonishing detail. In some mines, paleontologists have discovered entire fossil forests trapped upright where they once grew, buried rapidly by sediment and preserved beneath later rock layers. These discoveries reveal that coal seams are not random accumulations of carbon. They are the remains of real ecosystems frozen inside Earth's crust. Some coal seams stretch across hundreds of miles, indicating that ancient swamp systems once covered enormous regions continuously for immense spans of time. Others appear fragmented, interrupted by ancient river channels, storms, tectonic shifts, or marine flooding events that repeatedly reshaped the landscape. By reading the layers carefully, geologists can reconstruct ancient coastlines and environmental cycles from worlds that vanished hundreds of millions of years ago. There is also something deeply violent hidden inside the process. Although the forests themselves may have seemed lush and stable on the surface, the underground transformation required immense geological forces. Entire regions slowly sank under their own weight as sediments accumulated. Tectonic activity folded and compressed rock layers deep beneath mountains. In places where continents collided, buried coal seams experienced even greater pressure and heat. Some seams were shattered, tilted, or altered by volcanic intrusions moving through the crust. Others were destroyed completely before humans ever had the chance to discover them. Earth was not carefully preserving fossil fuels for future civilizations. Most ancient carbon deposits were probably lost forever through erosion, metamorphism, or subduction deep into the mantle. What humans eventually found were simply the surviving remnants of a much larger planetary process. And even those surviving remnants remain unevenly distributed. Certain regions became extraordinarily rich in coal because ancient environmental conditions aligned perfectly there for millions of years. Parts of North America, Europe, China, India, and Australia contain vast coal reserves formed under very different geological histories. In the United States, enormous coal beds developed across ancient inland swamps and shallow basins during the Carboniferous and later periods. Appalachia, in particular, became one of the most famous coal-producing regions in the world. Yet, the coal beneath Appalachia is not just a resource. It is a geological archive preserving evidence of ancient tropical wetlands that existed long before the Appalachian Mountains themselves fully formed into their modern shape. Even today, researchers continue debating exactly how different coal deposits formed under varying environmental conditions. Some seams appear linked to stable, long-lived swamps. Others suggest repeated flooding cycles or coastal marine influences. Tiny differences in mineral content reveal changes in water chemistry, climate, fire frequency, and biological activity. The coal itself preserves clues not only about plants, but about entire planetary systems interacting together over immense stretches of time. And because coal formation depended on such specific conditions, many scientists believe large-scale coal deposits may actually be relatively rare on a cosmic scale. Earth may have passed through a unique biological and geological chapter difficult to repeat elsewhere. If intelligent civilizations exist on distant planets, they may never inherit fossil fuels at all. Their technological histories could unfold completely differently, depending on how their ecosystems evolved and whether carbon burial ever occurred on a massive scale. That possibility adds another layer of strangeness to the story. Human industrial civilization may partially exist because ancient wetlands on one small planet happened to avoid fully decomposing hundreds of millions of years ago. Yet, while coal creation unfolded slowly underground, the modern human use of coal happened astonishingly fast by comparison. What took Earth tens or hundreds of millions of years to create, industrial societies began extracting and burning within only a few centuries. Mines expanded across entire mountain ranges. Railroads carried coal into growing cities. Smoke darkened industrial skylines across Europe and North America. In many places, people no longer saw coal as ancient biology. They saw it simply as fuel, commerce, electricity, heat, and progress. But underground, the coal never stopped being what it originally was. Even inside black industrial coal, microscopic plant structures can still survive. Under microscopes, scientists sometimes identify spores, cell walls, and compressed biological patterns hidden within the carbon. The ancient forests are still there, in fragments, concealed beneath the darkness. Perhaps that is why coal carries such a strange emotional weight compared to other rocks. Granite feels ancient, but lifeless. Coal feels ancient and alive at the same time. It is stone created from ecosystems. It is geology built from sunlight and growth and decay. And when held in the hand, it represents a chain of events stretching backward through nearly incomprehensible spans of time. Somewhere inside every piece of coal lies the memory of humid air moving through giant prehistoric forests beneath a sky no human being would have recognized. For decades, people repeated the same image whenever they imagined the origin of oil. Giant dinosaurs collapsing into prehistoric mud, their bodies slowly transforming underground into black liquid fuel over millions of years. The idea became so widespread that even today, many people casually describe gasoline as dead dinosaurs. It sounds believable at first because dinosaurs feel ancient, enormous, and connected to lost worlds. But the deeper scientists studied petroleum geology, the stranger the real story became. Modern civilization is not primarily powered by buried dinosaurs. In most cases, it is powered by the remains of organisms so small that billions of them could drift unnoticed through a single drop of ancient seawater. Long before humans understood chemistry or geology, natural oil seeps already appeared in strange places across the world. Thick, black liquid bubbled from the ground in parts of Mesopotamia, Persia, China, and the Americas. Ancient people sometimes used these substances for waterproofing, medicine, torches, or ritual fires. Some natural gas leaks burned continuously for centuries, creating flames that seemed supernatural to those who discovered them. Yet nobody could truly explain where the material came from. Even when the modern oil industry emerged during the 19th century, the underground origins of petroleum remained partly mysterious. It took decades of geological research before scientists began realizing that the answer was hidden not in giant animals, but in ancient oceans. Hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth's seas were filled with microscopic life. Tiny algae, plankton, bacteria, and single-celled organisms drifted through warm, shallow waters under sunlight-rich skies. These organisms may appear insignificant individually, but together they formed vast biological systems stretching across entire oceans. Much like modern plankton today, they absorbed sunlight and carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, converting solar energy into organic matter. Every day, unimaginable numbers of these tiny organisms lived, reproduced, died, and sank slowly downward through the water column. Normally, much of that material would decompose or become consumed by other marine life before reaching the sea floor. But under certain environmental conditions, decomposition slowed dramatically. And this is where the story becomes truly important. In some ancient seas, oxygen levels near the bottom became dangerously low. These oxygen-poor environments are sometimes called anoxic zones. Modern oceans still contain smaller versions of them today, often referred to as dead zones. Fish struggle to survive there. Scavengers disappear. Decomposition slows because many organisms responsible for breaking down organic matter require oxygen. During certain periods of Earth's history, however, these low oxygen conditions may have spread across enormous regions of the ocean. Massive amounts of microscopic organic material settled onto the seafloor and remained partially preserved instead of being completely recycled back into the environment. Layer after layer accumulated over immense stretches of time. Mud, clay, minerals, and dead microorganisms formed dark, organic-rich sediments beneath ancient seas. At first, these layers did not resemble oil at all. They were more like thick deposits of carbon-rich sludge buried beneath sediments slowly accumulating above them. But once burial continued deep underground, heat and pressure gradually began transforming the material chemically. One of the key stages in this process involves the creation of a waxy, organic substance known as kerogen. Kerogen is not exactly oil yet, but it represents a crucial intermediate stage. As temperatures increase deeper underground over millions of years, kerogen begins breaking apart into liquid hydrocarbons and natural gas. This transformation usually occurs within a specific temperature range, often called the oil window. If temperatures remain too low, oil never fully forms. If temperatures become too high, the material may break down further into gas or become destroyed entirely. The creation of petroleum, therefore, depends on an extraordinarily delicate balance of geological conditions unfolding across vast timescales. And unlike the dramatic dinosaur image popular culture created, the actual process is almost invisible. Entire oceans quietly produced organic sediments, grain by grain, for millions of years beneath calm water and drifting plankton blooms. The scale is difficult to comprehend. A single gallon of gasoline may ultimately trace its origins back to countless microscopic organisms that lived in ancient seas before humans, mammals, or even flowering plants existed. In a strange way, modern civilization may run less on prehistoric monsters and more on fossilized sunlight captured by trillions of forgotten microorganisms. Dinosaurs did contribute organic material occasionally, of course, Any buried organism potentially adds carbon compounds to sedimentary systems. But compared to the enormous volumes of microscopic marine life accumulating across ancient oceans, large dinosaur bodies represented only a tiny fraction of total organic input. Most dinosaurs died on land, where scavengers, oxygen, bacteria, and erosion usually destroyed remains before deep burial could preserve them. Marine microorganisms, on the other hand, died continuously in staggering numbers and settled directly into sediment-rich underwater environments ideal for long-term preservation. Some researchers describe ancient oil source rocks almost like biological graveyards made from compressed ocean ecosystems. And the deeper scientists investigate these source rocks, the more detailed the story becomes. Certain molecular traces called biomarkers survive within petroleum and reveal clues about the organisms that originally contributed to it. These chemical fingerprints allow geologists to identify ancient algae, bacteria, and planktonic life hidden inside modern crude oil. In some cases, researchers can even reconstruct environmental conditions from vanished oceans based on the chemistry preserved inside hydrocarbons. Oil, therefore, behaves not only as fuel, but also as a kind of molecular archive, preserving fragments of ancient marine worlds. And those worlds were often stranger than people realize. Many ancient seas looked nothing like modern oceans. During parts of the Mesozoic era, warm, shallow inland seas covered huge portions of continents. North America itself was once split by vast interior seaways filled with marine reptiles, ammonites, and drifting plankton blooms. Regions that are now deserts or dry plains once lay beneath tropical waters rich with microscopic life. The Middle East, home to some of the largest oil reserves on Earth, was once submerged beneath shallow ancient seas for millions of years. Beneath the sand dunes of Saudi Arabia and surrounding regions lie thick sedimentary rocks formed from marine environments teeming with tiny organisms long before humans existed. Even the Sahara Desert, now associated with endless dryness, passed through periods when rivers, lakes, and marine systems supported entirely different ecosystems. Earth's surface changes so dramatically across geological time that some of the driest places on modern Earth once belonged to ancient oceans, producing future petroleum reserves deep underground. There is also another unsettling aspect to the story. Oil formation required not only life, but often environmental stress or instability. Some major petroleum source rocks formed during periods when ocean oxygen levels collapsed across wide regions of the planet. Scientists refer to several of these intervals as oceanic anoxic events. During such episodes, changing climate conditions, volcanic activity, nutrient surges, or altered ocean circulation may have disrupted marine ecosystems on a global scale. Large portions of the seafloor became depleted in oxygen, creating conditions where enormous amounts of organic material could accumulate without fully decomposing. Some researchers believe these events may have contributed to extinctions while simultaneously helping create future oil reserves. In other words, parts of modern civilization may partially depend on ancient environmental crises buried beneath the earth. That connection gives petroleum an almost paradoxical identity. Oil represents both life and death at the same time. It formed from flourishing marine ecosystems powered by sunlight, yet often under conditions where oxygen vanished and ecosystems became unstable. It is the preserved residue of worlds that no longer exist. And unlike coal, which still sometimes visibly resembles compressed plant matter, petroleum hides its biological origins beneath dark, liquid chemistry. When people pump crude oil from deep underground today, they are extracting ancient marine carbon transformed by heat, pressure, time, and geology over immense spans of Earth's history. The liquid itself may travel through pipelines and engines looking modern and industrial, but its origins belong to oceans more ancient than human imagination naturally understands. Some geologists even describe oil migration through underground rock layers, almost like the movement of ghost oceans beneath the surface. Because after oil forms, it rarely stays where it originated. It slowly moves upward through porous rock under pressure until trapped beneath impermeable layers deep underground. Entire hidden reservoirs can therefore exist far away from the ancient seabeds that originally created them. This means that beneath deserts, forests, mountains, and offshore drilling platforms, there may still be invisible traces of vanished marine ecosystems moving slowly through rock in darkness. And perhaps that is the strangest realization of all. The modern world often feels disconnected from prehistory. Yet nearly every airplane flight, cargo ship, highway, and plastic object depends partly on microscopic organisms that drifted through ancient oceans hundreds of millions of years ago, beneath skies no human being would have recognized. If someone could stand above the Earth hundreds of millions of years ago and watch the planet from space, the oceans would probably look strangely unfamiliar. The colors may have been different. The coastlines certainly were. Entire continents sat in positions that no longer exist today, while shallow inland seas flooded regions that are now deserts, mountains, or dry plains. Some oceans stretched warm and calm beneath greenhouse climates. Others churned beneath volcanic skies, while tectonic plates slowly rearranged the surface of the world. But hidden beneath those ancient waters, something far more important was happening, quietly and continuously. The oceans were slowly manufacturing the raw material that would one day power ships, airplanes, highways, factories, plastics, and much of modern civilization itself. Yet the process did not begin with violence or catastrophe. It began with sunlight touching water. Across those prehistoric seas, microscopic algae and plankton drifted endlessly near the surface where light could still penetrate. They absorbed sunlight and carbon dioxide, just as plants do on land, converting energy into organic matter through photosynthesis. Individually, they were nearly invisible, but collectively, they formed enormous living systems covering vast portions of the oceans. Even today, marine plankton produce a huge percentage of Earth's oxygen. Ancient oceans likely functioned similarly, though under environmental conditions that sometimes became far more extreme than modern seas. Warm temperatures, nutrient-rich waters, volcanic activity, shifting currents, and changing atmospheric chemistry all influenced how life spread through those ancient marine worlds. In some places, biological productivity exploded. Massive blooms of microorganisms filled the upper ocean with drifting life. And when those organisms died, they began sinking slowly into darkness below. Normally, much of that material would disappear before ever reaching the sea floor. Fish, bacteria, scavengers, and oxygen-rich waters recycle organic matter efficiently in healthy marine systems. But Earth's ancient oceans were not always healthy in the modern sense. There were periods when huge portions of the deep ocean became depleted of oxygen. In those silent waters, decomposition slowed dramatically. Dead microorganisms settled onto the seabed faster than nature could fully erase them. Over immense spans of time, thick layers of carbon-rich organic sediments accumulated beneath the sea. And those layers would eventually become some of the most important petroleum source rocks on Earth. Scientists still debate exactly what triggered certain ancient oxygen collapses, because multiple factors may have interacted together. Some periods appear linked to massive volcanic eruptions, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Others may have involved warming oceans, disrupting circulation patterns. Warmer water holds less oxygen naturally, and if ocean circulation weakens, deep waters may stop receiving fresh oxygen from the surface. Nutrient surges from erosion or volcanic ash may also have fueled enormous plankton blooms, which then worsened oxygen depletion when massive amounts of organic material sank and decomposed below. In many ways, the ancient oceans behaved like living systems, capable of falling out of balance. And when they did, they sometimes created the perfect conditions for future oil formation. Geologists refer to several of these intervals as oceanic anoxic events. During these periods, large sections of the seafloor may have become dark, stagnant, and nearly lifeless in terms of oxygen-dependent organisms. Black organic-rich mud accumulated slowly beneath the water, preserving the remains of ancient marine life instead of fully recycling them back into the environment. Some of these deposits became astonishingly thick and widespread. Even now, petroleum geologists study these ancient layers carefully because many of the world's oil reserves ultimately trace back to them. It is strange to think that modern civilization may partly depend on ancient moments when the oceans themselves became unstable. But Earth's prehistoric seas were not simply dead zones. They were also places of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Imagine drifting above a warm, shallow sea during the age of reptiles. Sunlight filters through clear turquoise water, stretching toward distant coastlines lined with primitive forests. Marine reptiles move beneath the surface, while ammonites spiral through the currents. Coral systems expand across shallow shelves. Storms gather over warm tropical waters that cover regions now buried beneath desert sand. And beneath that beautiful surface, trillions of microscopic organisms continue living and dying every day in numbers so vast that entire future oil fields are slowly forming, grain by grain, beneath the seabed. Some of the most important oil-producing regions on Earth were once shallow marine environments exactly like this. The Arabian Peninsula, now dominated by heat and desert, spent millions of years beneath warm tropical seas, ideal for carbonate formation and organic accumulation. Beneath Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries lie thick sequences of marine sedimentary rocks, preserving evidence of vanished oceans filled with microscopic life. The same is true beneath parts of Texas, the Gulf Coast, Siberia, Venezuela, and offshore continental shelves around the world. Modern geography hides ancient oceans almost everywhere beneath the surface. In North America alone, huge portions of the continent were submerged repeatedly beneath inland seas during different geological periods. The Western Interior Seaway once split the continent from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. Beneath those waters, sediments rich in marine organic matter slowly accumulated over millions of years. Today, some of those ancient deposits contribute to major petroleum systems deep underground. Entire modern energy industries, therefore, depend on seas that vanished before humans existed. And yet, oil formation required more than just organic-rich mud. The sediments themselves had to survive burial without being destroyed. Tectonic forces had to avoid overheating them too early. Source rocks needed to remain within specific temperature ranges long enough for kerogen to transform into liquid hydrocarbons. The oil then had to migrate through porous rock and become trapped beneath impermeable layers underground instead of escaping to the surface. At every stage, the process depended on geological coincidence operating over immense timescales. This is why petroleum deposits remain unevenly distributed across the planet. Ancient oceans existed almost everywhere at different times, but only certain regions preserved the exact combination of conditions necessary to create large, recoverable oil reserves. Some scientists compare it to an incredibly complicated recipe involving biology, chemistry, climate, tectonics, burial history, and time all working together. Even slight differences in any stage may prevent oil systems from forming successfully. That complexity has led some researchers to wonder whether Earth itself may be unusually fortunate in possessing such abundant fossil fuel resources. There are also hints that ancient marine extinctions sometimes played a role in the story. Certain oceanic anoxic events coincided with biological crises where marine ecosystems experienced severe stress. During some intervals, black shales rich in organic matter spread across huge areas of the seafloor, while oxygen levels collapsed in deeper waters. Volcanic provinces erupted enormous volumes of lava and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Climate systems shifted, species disappeared. Yet those same crises may have simultaneously helped create future petroleum source rocks. It is an unsettling connection because it means modern industrial civilization may partially run on the preserved remains of ecosystems shaped during periods of planetary instability. In some ways, the oil beneath Earth's surface represents ancient environmental imbalance frozen into geology. And still, the oceans kept changing. Sea levels rose and fell repeatedly over geological time. Continents drifted apart. Mountains rose where seabeds once existed. Entire marine basins vanished through tectonic collision, while new oceans opened elsewhere. Sediments buried old sediments. Heat slowly transformed organic material deeper underground. And beneath all of it, ancient biological energy remained trapped in darkness, waiting for a species intelligent enough to uncover it. Even today, geologists searching for oil often reconstruct vanished oceans like detectives rebuilding lost worlds. They study microscopic fossils trapped in rocks to determine water depth, salinity, oxygen levels, and ancient climate conditions. Tiny plankton shells preserved inside sediments reveal whether an environment once belonged to a shallow tropical sea, a deep basin, or an oxygen-starved marine shelf. In some oil exploration labs, scientists spend years analyzing rocks no ordinary person would ever notice, trying to understand oceans that disappeared hundreds of millions of years ago. The modern oil industry, therefore, depends not only on drilling technology and engineering, but also on paleontology, sedimentology, chemistry, and climate reconstruction. Finding petroleum often means finding the ghost of an ancient sea, and perhaps the strangest realization is how invisible the entire process would have appeared while it was happening. No creature swimming through those prehistoric waters could possibly understand that the drifting microorganisms beneath them would one day power global transportation networks and industrial economies. The oceans simply continued following natural cycles of life, death, burial, and chemistry beneath changing skies. Yet inside those silent marine sediments, Earth was slowly storing ancient sunlight in liquid form. Every barrel of crude oil, therefore, contains traces of forgotten oceans, microscopic life, vanished climates, and biological systems older than human imagination naturally knows how to picture. Most people imagine oil sitting underground like giant hidden lakes, waiting beneath the earth, sealed inside enormous caverns filled with black liquid. Movies, cartoons, and early industrial imagery helped create that picture for generations. It feels intuitive because liquids collect in pools on the surface, so naturally, people assume the same thing happens deep underground. But the real underground world is far stranger and far more complex. In reality, oil rarely exists in massive empty chambers. Instead, it moves slowly through microscopic spaces inside ancient rocks, drifting through the earth almost like an invisible underground migration that can continue for millions of years. And understanding how that migration works became one of the most important scientific puzzles in modern history. Far below the surface, after petroleum forms inside deeply buried source rocks, pressure continues building around it. Organic-rich sediments slowly heat and transform until liquid hydrocarbons begin separating from the surrounding rock. But oil is lighter than the salty water that fills most underground pore spaces, and because of that difference, it naturally wants to rise upward. The movement is incredibly slow compared to anything humans experience on the surface. Sometimes it may take millions of years for petroleum to travel significant distances underground. Yet, over geological time, the movement becomes enormous. Entire rivers of invisible hydrocarbons migrate through buried rock formations beneath continents and oceans without any human ever seeing them directly. The rocks themselves are part of the mystery. To the human eye, solid stone appears completely sealed and impenetrable. But many underground rocks contain networks of tiny pores and fractures between mineral grains. Certain sandstones, limestones, and carbonate formations behave almost like hardened sponges deep beneath the earth. Geologists call these reservoir rocks because they can store fluids inside their microscopic spaces. Oil migrates through these pores under pressure, moving upward whenever pathways remain open. In some formations, the pores connect efficiently enough for hydrocarbons to travel considerable distances. In others, movement becomes trapped or blocked entirely. The underground world is therefore less like a system of giant caves and more like an enormous three-dimensional maze hidden inside stone itself. And while oil tries to rise, something else determines whether it survives long enough for humans to eventually discover it. Caprock. Caprocks are dense, impermeable layers that prevent migrating oil from escaping farther upward. Shale, salt, and certain tightly packed rocks often perform this role. When oil rises through porous formations and eventually encounters an impermeable barrier above it, the hydrocarbons begin accumulating beneath the seal. Over time, large underground reservoirs may slowly form. Without caprock, most petroleum would eventually continue migrating upward until it leaked naturally to the surface or became destroyed by bacteria and oxidation. In fact, many ancient oil systems probably vanished long before humans evolved because their underground traps failed millions of years ago. Some leaked away silently into prehistoric oceans or ancient landscapes. Others were destroyed by tectonic activity, heat, erosion, or shifting geological structures. What modern civilization extracts today represents only a fraction of the petroleum Earth originally generated. The structures capable of trapping oil are often surprisingly dramatic once visualized. Some form when rock layers bend upward into giant underground arches called anticlines. Because oil rises through porous rock, it accumulates near the top of these folded structures beneath impermeable seals. Others form around faults where tectonic movements shift rock layers against one another, creating barriers that trap migrating hydrocarbons. Salt domes create another extraordinary type of trap. Deep underground salt can slowly deform and rise upward over millions of years, warping surrounding sediments and forming ideal conditions for petroleum accumulation. Along the Gulf Coast of the United States, enormous oil reserves became associated with these hidden salt structures buried beneath coastal sediments. Entire energy industries, therefore, grew around underground geological shapes, invisible from the surface above them. In many ways, petroleum geology became a science of interpreting hidden architecture beneath the earth. But finding those underground traps was historically incredibly difficult. Before modern geophysics, oil exploration often depended partly on luck, surface seeps, and educated guesses. Early drillers searched for regions where natural oil leaked to the surface or where certain rock formations appeared promising. Sometimes wells struck enormous reservoirs. More often, they failed completely. entire fortunes disappeared drilling dry holes into empty rock. The deeper scientists studied petroleum systems, the more they realized that successful oil formation required an almost improbable chain of events. First, organic-rich source rocks had to form under the right ancient environmental conditions. Then, those rocks needed proper burial and heating to generate hydrocarbons. Migration pathways had to remain open. Reservoir rocks needed sufficient porosity. Cap rocks had to seal the system effectively. Geological structures needed to trap the oil before it escaped. And finally, all of it had to survive intact long enough for humans to arrive and discover it. Even slight disruptions anywhere in that chain could prevent major oil fields from ever existing. This complexity transformed petroleum exploration into something closer to detective work than simple drilling. By the 20th century, geologists began using seismic surveys to peer underground without directly seeing the rocks themselves. Explosive charges or vibrating machines sent shockwaves into the earth, and instruments recorded how the waves reflected back from different rock layers. From these signals, scientists gradually reconstructed hidden geological structures miles beneath the surface. Anticlines, faults, buried reefs, salt domes, and ancient sedimentary basins slowly emerged from patterns of reflected sound. It was almost like learning to map invisible worlds through echoes traveling inside the planet. Modern seismic imaging became so advanced that geologists can now generate astonishingly detailed underground images, revealing structures hidden beneath oceans, deserts, forests, and cities. Yet despite all the technology, uncertainty never fully disappears. Even today, drilling remains partly an act of risk. Some promising structures contain little recoverable oil. Others surprise researchers with unexpected discoveries. There are still reservoirs hidden beneath regions humans barely understand geologically. And, perhaps even more fascinating, some scientists suspect vast quantities of petroleum may remain undiscovered in extremely deep or remote formations. Arctic basins, offshore continental margins, and ultra-deep reservoirs continue attracting exploration because the underground migration of hydrocarbons may have concentrated oil in places humans have barely studied. But the deeper drilling goes, the more dangerous and technically difficult the process becomes. High pressures, unstable formations, extreme temperatures, and deep water environments create enormous engineering challenges. The modern oil industry, therefore, operates partly at the edge of human technological capability, pursuing fluids that migrated through rock over geological time beneath conditions no human naturally evolved to survive. There is also something strangely alive about the way petroleum behaves underground. Oil systems respond dynamically to pressure changes, tectonic shifts, temperature differences, and fluid movement. Some reservoirs slowly recharge through continued migration. Others lose pressure as hydrocarbons are extracted. Natural gas expands aggressively when released. Water pushes upward beneath oil columns. Entire underground systems remain active long after their formation began millions of years earlier. In certain places, natural oil seeps still leak slowly into oceans or onto land today, reminders that the migration process never completely stopped. Off the coast of California, for example, natural petroleum seeps release hydrocarbons into seawater continuously from ancient underground systems. Long before industrial drilling, indigenous peoples in the region already knew about these tar deposits and used them for waterproofing boats and tools. The earth itself was revealing hidden oil reservoirs naturally through cracks and fractures in the crust. And yet, most underground petroleum remains invisible. Beneath deserts, forests, and oceans, oil continues sitting inside ancient rock layers that once belonged to vanished marine environments. Some reservoirs formed beneath seas that disappeared hundreds of millions of years ago. Others migrated across huge underground distances before becoming trapped. In many cases, the place where oil is discovered today may look nothing like the world where it originally formed. Dry deserts conceal ancient seabeds. Offshore rigs float above deeply buried ecosystems from vanished oceans. Mountain ranges contain petroleum systems older than the mountains themselves. The modern surface world hides an older, hidden geography underneath it, shaped by migration, burial, heat, pressure, and time. And perhaps that is what makes petroleum geology feel so mysterious even now. Oil is not simply buried fuel. It is evidence that the earth beneath us is constantly moving, reshaping, trapping, and transforming the remains of ancient worlds in darkness far below human sight. Long before oil-powered airplanes or coal-fed giant industrial furnaces, ancient people were already encountering strange substances leaking from the earth itself. In certain places, the ground seemed alive. Thick black liquid bubbled slowly from cracks in the soil. Sticky tar collected near riverbanks. Flames appeared where invisible gases escaped from underground and ignited naturally. To early civilizations, these places must have felt mysterious, almost supernatural, because the earth itself appeared to bleed fire and darkness. Nobody understood that these materials came from ancient forests and vanished oceans buried deep underground. Yet thousands of years before modern geology existed, humans had already begun experimenting with the hidden energy rising naturally from beneath the planet's surface. Some of the earliest known uses of petroleum-like substances appeared in Mesopotamia, the region often called the cradle of civilization. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, natural bitumen seeps emerged from the ground in several locations. Bitumen is a thick, sticky form of petroleum that can occur naturally where oil migrates upward and lighter compounds evaporate away. Ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians discovered that this strange black material had remarkable properties. It could waterproof boats. It could seal bricks. It could hold stones together in construction projects. Archaeologists have found evidence that bitumen was used in buildings, roads, baskets, and even decorative objects thousands of years ago. In a world without synthetic chemicals, naturally occurring petroleum must have seemed almost magical. Some historians believe bitumen played a major role in helping early cities survive near rivers prone to flooding, because waterproofing materials were essential in those unstable environments. Ancient builders may not have understood chemistry, but they understood usefulness immediately. And once humans realized that certain dark substances from the earth could resist water and fire better than ordinary materials, they began searching for them intentionally. References to bitumen and pitch even appear in some of humanity's oldest written stories. In parts of the ancient Near East, naturally occurring petroleum products became woven into mythology, trade, engineering, and religion. Some scholars suggest the slime pits mentioned in ancient texts may have referred to bitumen deposits. Whether literal or symbolic, these references reveal that people living thousands of years ago already recognized strange black substances emerging from the ground as something powerful and unusual. In ancient Egypt, petroleum-related materials may have entered human history in even stranger ways. Certain researchers believe bitumen was sometimes used during mummification processes, particularly in later periods. In fact, some historians think the English word mummy itself may partly derive from Persian or Arabic words connected to bitumen-like substances, because preserved bodies darkened by resins and oils resembled black mineral compounds. Not every mummy contained petroleum products, and the exact historical use varied across different dynasties and periods. But the connection reveals something important. Ancient people increasingly experimented with materials leaking naturally from the earth, without fully understanding their origins. Somewhere beneath the rituals and engineering, humanity was beginning a relationship with fossil fuels that would eventually reshape the planet itself. In China, some of the earliest evidence of organized petroleum and natural gas use appeared astonishingly early. Historical records suggest that by at least the first millennium BCE, and possibly earlier in some regions, Chinese communities were already drilling shallow wells using bamboo tools to extract brine for salt production. In certain areas, natural gas escaping underground accompanied these salt deposits. Instead of ignoring it, people learned to capture and burn the gas using primitive bamboo pipelines. Long before modern industrial energy systems existed, flames fed by underground hydrocarbons were already heating evaporation pans and industrial processes in ancient China. The sophistication of these systems surprises many historians because they reveal how observant and adaptive early civilizations could become when valuable natural resources appeared consistently in the environment. Humans did not need geology textbooks to realize underground gases could produce controlled fire. They only needed curiosity and generations of experimentation. Coal also entered human civilization far earlier than many people realize. Pieces of surface coal likely attracted attention because they burned hotter and longer than ordinary wood. In places where erosion exposed coal seams naturally, ancient people probably encountered black rocks capable of producing intense heat long before organized mining began. Archaeological evidence suggests coal was used in parts of China thousands of years ago. The Romans may have burned coal in Britain during certain periods, especially after encountering surface deposits near occupied regions. Yet coal remained relatively limited for much of ancient history because wood remained easier to access in many environments. Large-scale coal dependence would not fully emerge until forests near growing cities became increasingly depleted and industrial demands exploded centuries later. Still, Scattered evidence shows that humans understood the unusual properties of coal long before the Industrial Revolution transformed it into the dominant fuel of empires. There is something deeply fascinating about this gradual relationship between ancient people and fossil fuels, because it developed through direct sensory experience rather than scientific understanding. Humans smelled natural gas before they understood hydrocarbons. They saw oil seep from rocks before they understood petroleum migration. They burned coal before they understood carbon chemistry. The Earth revealed fragments of its underground energy systems slowly and unevenly across different civilizations. And in many cases, those discoveries blended naturally into mythology. In parts of the ancient world, eternal flames burning from natural gas seeps became sacred sites. Near modern Azerbaijan, natural gas escaping through fractures in the earth fueled fires that may have burned continuously for centuries or longer. Such places became spiritually important in some ancient traditions because flames emerging directly from the ground seemed impossible to explain. To people without geological knowledge, the earth itself appeared alive with hidden fire. Some historians believe these eternal flames may have influenced Zoroastrian religious traditions centered partly around sacred fire symbolism, though scholars still debate the exact historical connections. Similar phenomena appeared elsewhere too. Across the ancient Mediterranean and Middle East, natural seeps of oil, tar, and gas created landscapes that felt uncanny and mysterious. In some places, thick black petroleum bubbled from springs beside rivers. In others, invisible gases ignited from lightning strikes or human fire and continued burning from cracks in rock. Ancient observers interpreted these places through the language available to them: spirits, gods, underworld forces, curses, miracles. Yet beneath the myths, geological systems were quietly revealing themselves. Some of the earliest military technologies may also have involved petroleum products. Historical accounts describe incendiary substances used in warfare that researchers still debate today. The most famous example is Greek fire, a Byzantine weapon capable of burning on water and terrifying enemy fleets. Its exact composition remains uncertain because the formula was closely guarded and eventually lost. Many historians suspect petroleum-derived materials may have played some role in its construction, though the precise ingredients remain one of history's enduring mysteries. If true, it would mean humans recognized the destructive power of fossil fuels centuries before industrialization magnified that power globally. Even trade routes reflected the growing importance of these strange underground materials. Bitumen, asphalt, and mineral oils traveled between cities and civilizations because they served practical purposes no ordinary material could fully replace. Ancient merchants transported black waterproofing compounds across deserts and rivers long before gasoline engines existed. In many ways, humanity's relationship with fossil fuels began not with machines, but with curiosity about unusual substances appearing naturally in the environment. And perhaps the most haunting part is how little ancient people could possibly understand about the true age of what they were touching. To them, bitumen was simply part of the earth. Nobody imagined it originated from microscopic marine life buried beneath vanished oceans hundreds of millions of years earlier. nobody understood that coal once belonged to forests older than dinosaurs. Human history itself was far too short to naturally comprehend geological time. Yet piece by piece, civilizations learned to use fragments of ancient worlds hidden beneath the ground. Over thousands of years, these materials moved gradually from curiosity to utility, from utility to industry, and eventually from industry to global dependence. By the time the modern oil age arrived in the 19th and 20th centuries, humanity was no longer merely discovering fossil fuels. It was unlocking energy reserves created before human beings existed at all. But the first chapters of that story began much earlier, beside ancient fires, riverbanks coated in tar, and mysterious flames rising from the earth in silence beneath unfamiliar stars. For most of human history, civilization moved at the speed of muscles, wind, water, and firewood. Cities could only grow so large before nearby forests disappeared. Armies marched as fast as humans or animals could carry supplies. Most people lived and died within short distances of where they were born because transportation remained slow, expensive, and exhausting. Even powerful empires were limited by energy. Every civilization depended almost entirely on current sunlight captured through crops, forests, rivers, and animal labor. Then humanity discovered how to unlock sunlight from the ancient past instead. And once that happened, the scale of civilization changed faster than anything the world had ever seen before. At first, coal did not look like the beginning of a planetary transformation. In many places, it was simply a dark rock pulled from the ground to replace increasingly scarce firewood. But coal contained something forests could not easily provide: concentrated energy. A relatively small amount of coal could produce enormous heat for long periods of time. As populations expanded across Europe and parts of Asia, pressure on forests became intense. Entire regions lost vast numbers of trees to heating, metalworking, shipbuilding, and construction. By the 17th and 18th centuries, some societies were already facing growing energy shortages. Coal arrived at exactly the moment civilization needed a denser fuel source to continue expanding. And once engineers learned how to harness that energy mechanically, human history accelerated. Steam engines became one of the first great turning points. Early designs were crude and inefficient, often used simply to pump water out of flooded mines. But over time, inventors improved them steadily. By converting the heat from burning coal into mechanical motion, humans suddenly gained access to power far beyond animal strength. Factories no longer depended entirely on rivers for moving machinery. Mines could dig deeper. Production increased. Entire industries began reorganizing themselves around machines fueled by ancient carbon buried underground. The Industrial Revolution was not just a technological shift. It was an energy revolution. Civilization had discovered a way to tap into millions of years of stored biological energy almost instantly. Cities transformed rapidly under this new system. Smokestacks rose above industrial districts. Iron foundries glowed through the night. Railroads stretched across continents, carrying coal, steel, food, and people farther and faster than previous generations could have imagined. In places like Britain, Germany, and the northeastern United States, coal became the hidden heartbeat of industrial civilization. Entire landscapes changed shape around mining regions. Mountains were cut open, rivers blackened with soot and runoff. Underground tunnel networks expanded beneath towns, where generations of miners descended daily into darkness to extract compressed remnants of ancient forests. And above ground, human life reorganized itself around industrial time. Factories demanded schedules. Railroads demanded coordination. Cities demanded constant energy. Fossil fuels allowed civilization to grow denser, louder, and more interconnected than ever before. Yet coal alone was only the beginning. Petroleum would eventually push the transformation even further because oil possessed qualities coal did not. Unlike coal, petroleum could be refined into liquid fuels easy to transport and ideal for engines requiring mobility. When internal combustion engines emerged during the 19th century, oil suddenly became one of the most valuable substances on Earth. Gasoline, diesel, and kerosene changed transportation completely. Horses gradually disappeared from major cities. Automobiles spread across roads once designed for wagons. Trucks replaced slower freight systems. Airplanes eventually connected continents within hours. Entire modern transportation networks grew from ancient marine microorganisms, transformed underground across geological time. The scale of this transformation is difficult to overstate. Before fossil fuels, crossing the Atlantic Ocean required weeks or months depending on conditions. Today, aircraft powered by refined petroleum cross oceans overnight. Before industrial energy, food production relied heavily on human labor, animal power, and seasonal limits. Modern agriculture now depends on fuel-driven machinery, synthetic fertilizers derived partly from fossil fuels, and global transportation systems carrying crops across continents. Even modern medicine became connected to petroleum chemistry through plastics, pharmaceuticals, sterilization systems, and industrial manufacturing. Oil did not merely improve civilization, it rewired nearly every system humans depend on daily. And perhaps the strangest part is how invisible that dependence often feels. Most people rarely think about fossil fuels while using smartphones, wearing synthetic fabrics, eating packaged food, or traveling through illuminated cities. Yet petroleum hides inside plastics, cosmetics, asphalt, electronics, medical devices, fertilizers, paints, lubricants, and thousands of industrial products surrounding modern life constantly. In many ways, civilization itself became a machine powered by ancient carbon. Even electricity transformed through fossil fuels. Coal-fired power plants allowed entire cities to remain illuminated through the night. Electric grids expanded across countries. Factories could operate continuously. Refrigeration changed food storage. Communication systems accelerated. By the 20th century, industrial nations had built societies fundamentally dependent on constant energy consumption. economic growth became tied directly to fossil fuel access. Nations with large coal and oil reserves gained enormous geopolitical influence. Wars increasingly involved energy infrastructure, shipping routes, and resource control. Some historians even argue that the modern geopolitical map cannot be understood separately from the distribution of fossil fuels beneath the Earth. Entire alliances, invasions, and global tensions emerged partly because buried energy reserves had become central to industrial civilization. Yet, while fossil fuels created extraordinary technological expansion, they also reshaped human relationships with time and nature. Before industrialization, natural limits remained highly visible in daily life. Seasons controlled agriculture. Darkness controlled activity after sunset. Distance controlled communication. Fossil fuels weakened many of those limitations. Machines replaced muscle. Electric lights replaced darkness. Engines collapsed geographic distance. Humanity began living faster than previous civilizations ever could. Some historians describe industrial society almost like a civilization temporarily borrowing millions of years of stored energy all at once. And in a sense, that is exactly what happened. Ancient sunlight preserved underground became available almost instantly through mining and drilling. Entire industrial economies rose on top of energy reserves accumulated across geological ages. But every transformation carried hidden costs. Industrial cities often became choked with smoke and pollution. In 19th century London, coal smoke mixed with fog to create deadly smog events darkening entire neighborhoods. Rivers near industrial centers filled with waste. Mining accidents killed thousands. Oil spills contaminated coastlines and marine ecosystems. Even during the height of industrial optimism, some observers noticed that fossil-fueled growth came with environmental consequences difficult to ignore. Yet industrial societies continued expanding because the advantages were overwhelming. Coal and oil delivered mobility, manufacturing power, military strength, transportation, economic growth, and unprecedented technological development. No previous energy source had ever matched their density and scalability. There is also something psychologically profound about how fossil fuels altered human expectations. Once societies became accustomed to rapid transportation, constant electricity, industrial agriculture, and global trade, those systems stopped feeling extraordinary. They became normal. Entire generations grew up assuming endless motion, instant access, and industrial abundance were natural features of civilization itself, rather than temporary outcomes tied to buried geological energy reserves. And because fossil fuels formed so slowly compared to the speed of human consumption, the imbalance remained largely invisible for decades. Humanity was effectively spending an energy inheritance accumulated over hundreds of millions of years. Some scientists and historians compare fossil fuels to a one-time planetary savings account created by ancient ecosystems and geological processes. Once industrial civilization learned how to access that account efficiently, growth accelerated beyond anything previous civilizations could sustain through renewable energy alone. This may partly explain why modern civilization expanded so explosively during the last 2 centuries compared to earlier human history. Fossil fuels allowed humans to exceed many traditional biological and environmental limits temporarily. But even now, debates continue about what that means long-term. Some researchers argue fossil fuels were a necessary phase enabling technological civilization to develop advanced science, medicine, infrastructure, and eventually renewable technologies. Others believe dependence on finite ancient carbon created dangerous environmental and political vulnerabilities from the beginning. There is no complete consensus on how future historians will ultimately interpret the fossil fuel era. But almost everyone agrees on one point. Coal and oil changed human civilization more dramatically than nearly any other discovery in history. They turned buried prehistoric worlds into the engine of modern society. And perhaps the most haunting realization is that beneath every illuminated city skyline, every highway, every airport, every cargo ship, and every industrial machine, there still lingers the ancient energy of vanished forests and forgotten oceans silently fueling the modern world from below. At first, the smoke looked almost beautiful. In the early industrial age, glowing factory windows illuminated the night, while black chimneys rose above growing cities like symbols of progress itself. Steam engines thundered across landscapes that had once depended on horses and rivers. Railroads connected distant towns, streets filled with electric light. Entire nations transformed within only a few generations. To many people living through that era, coal smoke did not represent danger. It represented modernity. It meant warmth during winter, jobs in expanding factories, and machines powerful enough to reshape the world. But slowly, almost quietly at first, another side of the fossil fuel age began revealing itself. The same energy that lifted civilization to extraordinary heights also started changing the air, water, landscapes, and atmosphere around it in ways humanity did not fully understand until much later. Some of the earliest warning signs appeared directly inside industrial cities themselves. By the 19th century, places like London, Manchester, Pittsburgh, and other coal-heavy urban centers often disappeared beneath thick layers of soot and smoke. Buildings darkened under constant pollution. Clothing absorbed ash from the air. In certain neighborhoods, sunlight itself struggled to cut through the haze. Historical accounts describe people coughing black residue from their lungs after years working in factories or mines. During severe smog events, visibility dropped so low that streets became dangerous to cross. One of the most infamous examples came in London during December 1952, when a deadly smog, fueled largely by coal smoke, settled across the city for several days. Thousands of people died either immediately or from later complications linked to respiratory illness. It shocked much of the world because industrial pollution was no longer just unpleasant. It had become lethal on a massive scale. Yet even before modern environmental science fully developed, many people already sensed something unnatural was happening. Rivers near industrial zones turned dark with waste and chemical runoff. Forests near heavy pollution sometimes weakened or died. Mining reshaped entire mountains and valleys. In coal regions, underground fires occasionally burned for decades beneath the surface. Oil spills blackened coastlines and coated wildlife in toxic sludge. Fossil fuels had given humanity unprecedented power, but extracting and burning them also unleashed forces civilization was only beginning to understand. And perhaps the deepest irony was hidden in the chemistry itself. The ancient forests and oceans that created coal and oil originally removed carbon dioxide from Earth's atmosphere over immense spans of geological time. But once humans burned those fossil fuels rapidly, that ancient carbon returned to the atmosphere in only a few centuries. Scientists eventually realized that this process could alter the planet's climate system. The basic greenhouse effect itself was not a modern discovery. As early as the 19th century, researchers like Svante Arrhenius explored the possibility that carbon dioxide could trap heat in Earth's atmosphere. At the time, the idea remained mostly theoretical because industrial emissions were still relatively small compared to what would come later. But during the 20th century, fossil fuel consumption exploded globally. Coal-fired power plants expanded. Automobiles multiplied into the hundreds of millions. Oil-powered transportation connected the entire planet. Industrial agriculture intensified, and atmospheric carbon dioxide levels began rising faster than natural systems could easily absorb. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, climate science had become one of the most studied and debated scientific fields in the world. The majority of climate researchers concluded that human greenhouse gas emissions, especially from fossil fuels, were significantly warming the planet. Evidence accumulated across multiple areas of study: rising global temperatures, shrinking glaciers, changing weather patterns, warming oceans, shifting ecosystems, and increasing atmospheric carbon concentrations measured directly over decades. Yet, despite broad scientific agreement on many core trends, debates continued over the exact pace, regional impacts, feedback systems, and long-term consequences involved. Climate systems are extraordinarily complex, and Earth's atmosphere interacts constantly with oceans, clouds, vegetation, ice, and solar cycles. But even with those complexities, one central reality became difficult to ignore. Human civilization was rapidly releasing carbon stored underground for hundreds of millions of years, and the atmosphere was responding. The oceans began changing too. Earth's seas absorb a large portion of the carbon dioxide humans release, which slightly alters ocean chemistry over time. Scientists call this ocean acidification, though the term can sound more dramatic than the actual chemical shift itself. The oceans remain alkaline overall, but even relatively small pH changes may affect marine organisms that depend on calcium carbonate shells or skeletons. Coral reefs, plankton, shellfish, and marine ecosystems face pressures not only from warming temperatures, but also from changing chemistry. Some researchers worry that long-term ocean changes could disrupt food chains and biodiversity in ways humanity still does not fully understand. Others caution that marine ecosystems have survived enormous environmental shifts throughout Earth's history and may prove more resilient than worst-case predictions suggest. Yet uncertainty itself became part of the unease. Fossil fuels had granted humanity extraordinary technological power, but the long-term planetary consequences remained difficult to fully predict. Meanwhile, the geopolitical side of fossil fuel dependence created another layer of complexity. Entire economies became tied to oil production and energy access. nations competed for drilling rights, pipeline routes, shipping lanes, and strategic reserves. Some wars and international tensions became deeply entangled with petroleum resources. Oil-rich regions gained enormous economic and political influence, while industrial nations grew increasingly dependent on stable fuel supplies to maintain transportation, electricity, manufacturing, and military systems. Modern civilization had effectively built itself around continuous fossil fuel consumption, making sudden transition extremely difficult, even when environmental concerns grew stronger. This created one of the central dilemmas of the modern world. Fossil fuels caused serious environmental challenges, yet they also supported nearly every major system civilization depended upon. Hospitals require electricity. Global food systems rely on fuel-driven machinery in transportation. Modern infrastructure, medicine, communication, and industrial production all emerged partly through fossil-fueled energy abundance. For many developing nations, access to affordable energy still remains directly connected to poverty reduction and economic growth. This complexity often gets lost in simplified public discussions where fossil fuels become portrayed either purely as evil or purely as progress. In reality, they transformed human civilization in ways both extraordinary and deeply destabilizing at the same time. Even the landscapes of extraction carry emotional contradictions. Some coal towns built entire communities around mining traditions passed through generations. Oil booms created cities, jobs, and economic opportunities across regions that were once sparsely populated. Families depended on these industries for survival and identity. Yet, the same industries often left environmental damage, dangerous working conditions, polluted waterways, and economic instability after resources declined. Across Appalachia, abandoned mines still scar portions of the mountains. In parts of the world, oil spills continue affecting ecosystems decades later. The benefits and consequences of fossil fuel civilization became tangled together so completely that separating them no longer felt simple. And beneath all of it remained the strange geological truth at the center of the story. Humans were burning the compressed remains of ancient ecosystems at a pace Earth itself never experienced naturally. Every year, billions of tons of carbon that once belonged to prehistoric forests and oceans returned to the atmosphere through combustion. In geological terms, the release was happening almost instantly. Some scientists have compared the modern fossil fuel era to a sudden planetary experiment unfolding in real time. Others point out that Earth's climate has changed dramatically many times before through volcanic activity, asteroid impacts, orbital cycles, and tectonic shifts. But never before had one species intentionally extracted and combusted ancient carbon reserves on such a global scale. There is also a quieter psychological effect hidden inside the fossil fuel age. Modern civilization became so dependent on constant energy abundance that many people stopped noticing how fragile those systems actually are. Entire cities depend on uninterrupted electricity. Food supply chains stretch across continents. Digital communication networks require massive infrastructure running continuously behind the scenes. fossil fuels helped create a civilization capable of astonishing technological achievements, but they also connected billions of people to highly complex industrial systems vulnerable to resource pressures, environmental shifts, and geopolitical instability. And still, humanity continues using them because no other energy transition in history has ever happened easily or quickly. Even now, scientists, engineers, economists, and governments debate how the world should move forward. Renewable energy technologies continue expanding. Nuclear power remains controversial but important in some regions. Carbon capture systems are being explored. Electric transportation grows steadily. Yet, fossil fuels still power much of the modern world because the scale of existing infrastructure is enormous. The ancient sunlight trapped beneath Earth's surface still drives much of civilization every single day. And perhaps that is what makes the story feel so haunting. The same buried worlds that allowed humanity to build industrial civilization may also be reshaping the future of the planet in ways humanity is only beginning to fully understand. Someday, in the distant future, historians may look back at the fossil fuel age the same way modern people look back at the Bronze Age or the Age of Sail, as a temporary chapter that completely transformed civilization before eventually giving way to something new. And if that future arrives, people living centuries from now may struggle to understand what it felt like to build an entire world around ancient carbon buried beneath the earth. They may look at photographs of oil refineries, coal trains, offshore drilling platforms, and traffic-filled highways with the same strange fascination modern humans feel when staring at abandoned pyramids or forgotten Roman roads. Because despite how permanent modern civilization appears today, energy systems have always changed throughout history. Wood gave way to coal. Coal shared power with oil and natural gas. And now, slowly and unevenly, humanity is beginning to search for whatever comes next. But replacing fossil fuels may become one of the most difficult transitions civilization has ever attempted, because modern society is built not only on energy, but on energy density. Coal and oil contain enormous amounts of stored power in relatively compact forms. A single barrel of oil can move vehicles across great distances, power industrial machinery, transport goods globally, and fuel entire economic systems. Fossil fuels became dominant partly because they are incredibly useful. Any replacement must somehow support billions of people living inside industrial civilization, while also solving environmental and geopolitical problems tied to ancient carbon. That challenge has pushed scientists, engineers, governments, and industries into one of the largest technological races in modern history. Solar energy often appears at the center of these discussions because, in a sense, it bypasses fossil fuels entirely and returns civilization to its original energy source, the sun itself. Ancient forests and plankton once captured sunlight slowly over millions of years before becoming coal and oil underground. Solar panels attempt something different. They capture sunlight directly in real time. In only a few decades, solar technology evolved from an expensive scientific curiosity into one of the fastest-growing energy sources on Earth. Vast solar farms now spread across deserts and open landscapes, where rows of dark panels silently convert light into electricity. Rooftops, satellites, remote villages, and even spacecraft increasingly depend on solar systems. Yet solar energy also carries limitations. Sunlight changes with weather, seasons, and geography. Electricity storage remains one of the greatest engineering challenges of the modern age, because civilization requires constant, reliable power even when sunlight disappears at night. This is why batteries became almost as important as solar panels themselves. Lithium-ion technology transformed portable electronics first, then gradually expanded into electric vehicles and grid storage systems. Entire industries now compete to develop longer-lasting, safer, cheaper batteries capable of stabilizing renewable energy networks on massive scales. Some researchers believe future breakthroughs in storage may become one of the defining technological achievements of the 21st century. Others caution that battery production introduces its own environmental pressures through mining, resource extraction, and industrial demand. Every energy system seems to carry trade-offs somewhere beneath the surface. Wind energy followed a similar path. Massive turbines now rise from plains, coastlines, and offshore regions where moving air constantly transfers energy across enormous rotating blades. From a distance, modern wind farms can feel strangely futuristic and ancient at the same time, almost like giant mechanical reeds turning slowly beneath the sky. Humans have used wind for thousands of years through sails and mills, but industrial turbines transformed that ancient relationship into electrical infrastructure capable of powering entire cities. Still, critics point out challenges involving land use, transmission systems, wildlife impacts, and intermittency. Supporters argue that renewable technologies continue improving rapidly and may eventually overcome many current limitations. The debate itself reveals how complicated modern energy systems have become. There is no single perfect replacement waiting quietly in the background. Instead, humanity appears to be experimenting with multiple overlapping possibilities simultaneously. Nuclear energy remains one of the most controversial and fascinating options. Unlike fossil fuels, nuclear power does not rely on burning carbon. Instead, it releases energy stored inside atomic nuclei through fission reactions, capable of generating extraordinary amounts of electricity from relatively small amounts of fuel. For some scientists, nuclear energy represents one of the few scalable, low-carbon systems powerful enough to support industrial civilization long-term. France, for example, generates much of its electricity through nuclear reactors. Supporters argue that modern reactor designs may become safer and more efficient than older generations. Critics, however, remain deeply concerned about radioactive waste, accidents, security risks, and the immense complexity of maintaining nuclear infrastructure safely across long periods of time. Disasters like Chernobyl and Fukushima left lasting psychological impacts far beyond the physical damage itself, because nuclear failures feel uniquely frightening to human imagination. Invisible radiation, contaminated landscapes, abandoned cities. These images continue shaping public perception even decades later. Yet, despite the fear, nuclear energy still remains central to many future energy discussions because of its enormous output and low direct carbon emissions. And then there is fusion, the technology that almost sounds like science fiction even now. Unlike nuclear fission, which splits atoms apart, fusion attempts to combine atomic nuclei together under extreme conditions, similar to those inside stars. If controlled fusion ever becomes commercially practical, it could theoretically provide vast amounts of energy using fuel sources like hydrogen isotopes with far less long-lived radioactive waste than traditional reactors. For decades, fusion remained famous partly because it always seemed 30 years away. Yet recent experimental breakthroughs continue renewing scientific optimism. Some researchers believe humanity may eventually achieve stable fusion power systems capable of transforming civilization again. Others remain skeptical about the engineering difficulties involved, arguing that commercial fusion may still require many decades or longer. But even the pursuit itself reveals something important about human civilization. Once societies become dependent on large-scale energy systems, the search for new power sources never truly stops. Some proposed futures involve hydrogen-based energy systems, where hydrogen acts as a transportable fuel produced through renewable electricity. Others focus on advanced geothermal systems, tapping heat deep beneath Earth's crust. Carbon capture technologies aim to remove carbon dioxide directly from industrial emissions or even from the atmosphere itself. Some experimental systems explore artificial photosynthesis, inspired by the same biological processes ancient plants once used naturally. And beneath all these technologies lies a deeper question few people fully agree on. Can modern civilization maintain endless growth without fossil fuels? Or will future societies need to redefine what progress itself means? Certain researchers believe technological innovation will solve most energy challenges through efficiency improvements, renewable expansion, and scientific breakthroughs. Others argue that industrial civilization may eventually confront hard physical limits involving resource extraction, ecological pressures, and energy demand. There is no universal consensus because predicting the future of civilization has always been extraordinarily difficult. Past generations often failed completely when trying to imagine the technologies of the modern world. The people burning early coal in 18th century factories could never have fully pictured satellites, global aviation, artificial intelligence, or digital communication networks. Likewise, modern humans may barely understand what energy systems centuries from now will actually look like. Perhaps future cities will operate through decentralized, renewable grids, almost invisible within architecture itself. Perhaps advanced nuclear systems will dominate. Perhaps technologies not yet invented will emerge unexpectedly. Or perhaps humanity will eventually learn that no civilization can consume energy infinitely without consequences. There is another haunting possibility too. If human civilization vanished entirely, Earth would eventually continue without us. Forests would reclaim abandoned highways. Cities would decay beneath vegetation and weather. Industrial infrastructure would collapse slowly over centuries. And deep underground, geological processes would continue silently. Could new coal and oil eventually form again? Technically, perhaps yes, but only under the right conditions and over immense spans of time. New ecosystems would need to bury carbon faster than decomposition recycled it. Oceans would need proper chemistry and sedimentation. Continents would continue drifting. Climate systems would continue changing. Millions upon millions of years would pass. The fossil fuels humans burn today are not simply resources. They are the compressed remains of worlds so ancient that Earth itself looked almost alien when they formed. And now, for a brief moment in planetary history, one intelligent species has learned how to unlock that ancient energy all at once. Perhaps that is the strangest realization of all. Modern civilization runs partly on sunlight captured by vanished forests and forgotten oceans hundreds of millions of years ago. Every glowing city skyline, every airplane crossing the night sky, every illuminated highway and industrial machine still carries echoes of prehistoric Earth hidden inside it. And somewhere far beneath the modern world, deep underground, in darkness untouched by human eyes, ancient carbon still waits silently beneath layers of stone while humanity decides what kind of energy future will come after the age of coal and oil finally fades into history. Thanks for spending this time exploring the ancient origins of coal and oil with me tonight. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments what mysterious topic I should explore next. Sleep well tonight.